Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Circuit Gilles, Villeneuve. Here's a lap first. Okay, so lap time there is a 124.993. We have morning weather this week, so default track temp for morning weather is 84 Fahrenheit track temp. Now, the lap that I'm using here is really right at my optimal, so I'm at a point in my practice where I'm putting down pretty consistent laps at improving pace, but I actually think there's more time out there. I'm running a little bit behind on my guide this week, and so I wanted to get this out sooner, but it's not typical for me to be running a lap that's almost dead on my optimal because I think there's just still more practice to be done, more room for improvement as far as that goes. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump back to the lap and go through this in more detail, turn by turn. All right, so going back to the start of the lap here and going down into turn one. So breaking point for me for turn one is kind of threshold right at about the midpoint of this asphalt section here to the right. So you'll see me hit about a 75 to 80% threshold brake at that point, keeping the car here to the right, and actually turned in just a tad early here. And you'll see that I kind of back off and then turn in a second time. So I kind of missed my line a little bit, and the reason I did that is because you really want to avoid crossing over the curb here. It is pretty rough to do that, but I like to use all of the curb here to the left here so that I can get the car to about the midpoint here, and because I missed my turn in by just a bit and hit that a little bit later, I ended up kind of running a little wider right than I would like. And you'll notice as I kind of turn back in for turn two, Senna, I'm actually running a little wide. So my line could have improved here a little bit, and so the sector time turned out to be fine because I think I had a real good early throttle still. But if I was to do anything differently here, as I'm trailing off the brakes and turning in, I would have turned in just a little bit later so that I could have gotten angled into the left just a little bit more. So I'm really aiming, like I say, to kind of come to about the midpoint here so that I can kind of late apex turn two, getting it closer to the curbing and getting on throttle earlier. So I'm not getting on throttle until right about here. I think I could have gotten on throttle just a little sooner, but straightening the car out and getting back to throttle using all of the road here to the left is really what has to be on your mind so that you can get to throttle sooner, committing to full throttle sooner. So you'll see that as I'm coming off the corner and getting on throttle, I'm going to maintain about 50% or so throttle while I'm still turning, then opening up, and then really just kind of aiming to reach the left-hand side of the road out to the curbing here to the left to make sure that I can straighten the exit out there as best as possible. So let's play through turn 1 and 2 here at speed. All right, so coming up down into turn 3 and 4, excuse me, Breaking point for me is, gosh, probably starting between the 2 and the 1, but I don't really threshold until I'm closer to the 1, I think. So you'll see there's a downshift and kind of a threshold break right before the 1. So that's probably about a 70% or so break at that point. And then there's going to be the downshift into second. Now, as I'm turning in here, I actually have kind of experimented with different lines through these corners where I'll take maybe a little bit more curb initially. But I found that if I did that, I tend to overslow the car a little bit. I wanted to carry more speed into the corner. So what I found myself doing is taking less curbing here to the right to carry more speed in, and then just cut the curb here on the left. And I took a little more curbing here than I would typically like to. You can see there's a pretty big bump there. But I like to take a little bit more curbing here to the left than on the first curbing to the right, and then let the car kind of carry all the way out to the wall here. And I found that if I did that, I could keep my speed up a little bit better, and I was less likely to all of a sudden drop, 2 or 3 tenths from cutting too much speed on corner entry. So really, I guess the point there is to keep your speed up, try to keep it smooth, try not to take too much curbing to upset the car too much so that you can get back to throttle right as you leave the second curb here. And actually, I don't come off throttle completely at all over the second curb. So as I'm turning in, I'm off brake, I'm off throttle completely, and maybe just slightly tapping the brakes to make sure I don't run wide of the curb here, and then getting to throttle in between, and then just really keeping throttle all the way through the corner from that point forward, modulating that and getting back to full throttle as soon as I know that I'm not going to overshoot and hit the wall. And of course, second gear all the way through up into third real quickly there, and then out. So here's that corner back at speed. So this is all full throttle all the way through here. I think that hotter weather with fuel, you may lift slightly just to avoid some oversteer and maybe the rear end coming out on you here at speed to make sure that you can get back to the right into your braking zone. But with qualifying fuel, you're, I think, typically always just going to take this full throttle all the way through here. But that is a point where the car could come around on you a little bit if you're not careful, if you don't quite have the line quite right. You can use the curbing here to the left. I think I typically do use all of that and then just kind of clip the grass on the exit to kind of help open up the line into the corner here, getting it up close to the wall. And my thought coming around this corner here is just to not run out too wide because I want to get back to the right and into the braking zone right away. So the braking zone comes up pretty quickly, and there'll be about a 80% brake here before reaching the end of the concrete portion of the wall. So there's the threshold brake right there at that point. And then just kind of carrying braking down into second gear. And I like to make sure I'm not apexing too soon into this corner because you really want to set up your line and your exit to the following corner. And what I found on the following corner here was that touching this curb, even just a little, can oftentimes be just enough to break the rear end free, and you'll actually just get a little bit loose getting on throttle. Getting on throttle at this point of the track is one of the most difficult points of getting on throttle that I found. That took the most kind of practice to get the feel for the right amount of throttle that I could feed in here, and making sure again to use all of the road on the exit, because right through this point is again where you're likely to spin if you're getting on throttle too soon, and if you're steering away from the wall and the curbing on the left too much and you're getting on throttle too soon, that combination of factors is enough to spin, and it'll catch you pretty quickly off guard and without warning. So, and once it starts to spin here, there's no saving it. So make sure to ease into throttle soon or gradually, and just let the car carry all the way out to this curbing on the left here just to be safe with that. So let's play this section of corners through at speed. All right, so coming down into turns 8 and 9. So this chicane is very, very unforgiving if you touch the curbing, and so I try to avoid the curbing just completely. And if anything, I think it's a little more forgiving to maybe lightly graze the curbing on corner entry to the right, but on the left, I found that it was almost always just randomly sending the car into a spin if I was just lightly touching the curbing on the left with the left-hand side tire. So I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. First, the braking zone. I'm going to threshold brake right past or just after the 2, and so probably right at about the point that you go under the overpass here. So there's going to be about an 80% brake right at about that point. Keeping in braking in a straight line here, and then as you turn in, you want a nice kind of sharp, decisive turn in where you're always going to hit your mark, and it's really important in these chicanes to hit your marks accurately. And like I say, it might be more forgiving to maybe lightly graze the curbing here on corner entry, at least from my experience that it was, and making sure that you're not touching the curbing, the concrete portion of the curbing here to the left, because I found that if I was just an inch or two up into this curbing here while I'm getting on throttle off the corner, that it was just almost always enough to send the car into a spin. And so I don't like using any of that curbing. Interestingly enough, you can straddle this curbing without an off track. So you can actually put a tire off into the grass and kind of go across the curbing with no off track, but it's not a fast turn line. I just did that by accident and thought that was kind of interesting. But you'll see that just because of the angle of the curb, if you took a line like that, and good luck doing that consistently, if you took a line like that, by the time you come across the curbing, the car is probably going to be pointed too far to the right, where you really want to be cutting in and angled inward at that point. So anyway, too much about that, but that's not a good line to take trying to straddle that curb anyway. So let's go ahead and play this through from the break point. So again, on corner exit, let the car run all the way out to the wall and into the curbing there, and making sure that as you commit to full throttle, that you got the car pretty straightened up, and you're going to go ahead and just let your speed carry you all the way out to the wall there safely. So coming down into the hairpin, braking point for me is right at about the 2 as far as threshold goes. So you'll see about an 75 to 80% or so threshold brake right before the 2 board there on the left. And again, braking in a straight line, keeping the car to the left, patient on turn in. You're going to get all the way down to first gear here. So what I do is because I H pattern shift, I'll shift down into second just for safety, because if I skip straight to first and I do that too soon, obviously very high risk of blowing your engine there. So I'll go to second and then down to first, and that rhythm and getting used to hearing where the revs are of the engine is something you really want to reproduce, because the amount of speed that you have turning into the hairpin is very difficult to get right. And it looks like my lowest speed at that point is about 35 miles per hour, and just a little too much speed or not quite enough speed, and it can really throw you off. And this corner can feel different every time you take it if your speed is just slightly off. And so what I aim to do is get as close to this curb here to the right, but kind of treat it as a little bit of a later apex where I can kind of come off the corner and get on throttle kind of just past this first steeper point in the midpoint of the corner. Just past that is kind of where I'm aiming to get over to, and then get back on throttle at that point. I'm actually more than 180 degree steering at this point. So when I'm getting on throttle here, I'm thinking less than even 50% throttle initially. So just kind of like 30-40% throttle or so. Just kind of get on throttle and continually turn the car as you're on throttle, and just go ahead and use as much of this road here to the left as you need to, but not to the point where it's going to require you to turn away too sharply to avoid the curbing, and kind of carrying too wide of a line too far out could be detrimental. But let the car carry out wide here as you get on throttle, and you'll see I'll ease on throttle and get onto full throttle after the car is balanced and straightened up. And then there's going to be a quick shift up into second at that point there. So let's play this through. All right, so all the way down the the casino straight here. We're going to go full throttle all the way down to the left-hand side to the two board. Now I do something here I don't recommend doing. I actually went out into the grass just a bit, and oftentimes when I'm kind of feeling out of track, I will, just to kind of get those references and memory of where the car is positioned, I'll kind of clip the grass a little bit to kind of get a feel for it. This is right before the braking zone, and that's why I don't really recommend doing that, because if you have your tire just slightly touching the grass when you enter your braking zone, then you could lose control of the car pretty quickly there. So don't recommend doing that, but that's just me trying to get a feel for it. And I kind of come back over onto the asphalt for the braking zone at the last second there. But obviously I'm not intentionally and going to touch the grass there every time. But the main point there is to just kind of keep the car left here as close to the grass as you safely can get it. And I'm going to threshold brake right at about the 2. So you'll see about a 80% brake, and I actually maybe am slightly past it. So by the time I actually hit my full 80% brake, I'm slightly past the 2. And trying to be patient on turn in. I actually kind of faded in a little early here, so I probably could have waited just a bit there. And as you're turning in here down into second gear, I actually probably take more second curbing than I do the first. I think that I will typically miss the curbing here to the right and just use all of the red and white curbing, and then sometimes just kind of clip the curbing here on the exit. But I think the goal should be there not to touch and use any of the tall concrete curbing there for safety there. And I think ideally I wouldn't have even touched this curbing here to the left because you really want to be back on throttle before you even get to the second curb. So I'm off brake, I'm off throttle. You want to be off brake by the time you've gotten turned in here. You want the car to be balanced as possible. And then you want to be back on throttle between the first and the second, and easing on throttle as you reach the second part of the chicane, and then letting the car track all the way out to the wall here. And there is a bump right here at the end of the red and white curbing, so I like to get off the curbing here as it ends, and I think I ran that pretty close to the edge of where there's a pretty significant bump there that the car will take. So that's, I think, right up on the limit there of the line, and I wouldn't run any further right than I've run there. So let's go ahead and play this through at speed. All right, so there's a lap of Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, and I hope you found it helpful, and talk to you later.